We're going to begin by creating a new Xcode project, and in that project we're going to select app, then iOS, and then click on next. We're going to give it a name. For this demo, I'm just going to call it Web3 Wallet Demo, and make sure that your interpreter is SwiftUI. Click on next and select the destination where you want to save the project. Once the project is set up, we need to do a couple of things. So let's list them down. The first is that we need to add the Web3 Auth SDK, which is a Swift package. The second thing is that we create a project on Web3 Auth dashboard. Third is to actually test and run the integration. So let's begin by going to File, click on Add Packages, and you're going to copy paste the GitHub URL for the Web3 Auth Swift SDK. You can find it at the bottom of the thread and click on Add Package. It's going to take a few seconds for the package to install. Once that is done, click on Add Package, and we can move on to the next step. So I'm just going to mark this as green check. Now let's create a project on the Web3 dashboard. So go to Chrome and go to the URL, which is dashboard.web3auth.io. Once there, you are going to have to sign up or sign in depending on if you're visiting for the first time. Since I'm creating it in a new browser, I'm just going to sign up with Twitter, but you can use the auth provider of your choice. It's going to take a few seconds to sign up, and after that, it's going to ask you to create a profile. So just fill in your company details. I'm just going to add Web3 Demo Company and click on Create Profile. Once you have a profile, you want to go to Plug and Play, click on Create Project and create a new project. So I'm just going to call it Web3 Demo App. Make sure you select Cyan mainnet because that is the only network which is supported in iOS SDKs, and click on Create. Once you have the demo app, you want to make sure that you can see your client ID. Let's go back to the project and start our integration. Let's mark this step done as well and move to the third. But before that, I think we need another step. Let's call it 2.5, where we do the actual integration, which is, write some code. So let's get rid of the boilerplate here. And I'm going to start by adding a simple button, which is going to have an action and a label. For the action, I'm just going to print I was clicked. And instead of the label, let's add a text component, and which will say login to Web3. Let's make sure that when I click, I see I was clicked. Great. Now, let's begin by importing the Web3 Auth library. And we are going to create a state variable. So it's going to be private var Web3 Auth, which is going to be Web3 Auth optional. The reason for it being optional, we'll cover that in a few minutes. We'll also add another variable called user, which will be of the type Web3 Auth state, again optional. Finally, we're going to add another private state variable, called is logged in or just logged in, which is going to be a boolean and default to false. Next up, in the body of the component, we are going to add a task inside onAppear, which is where we are going to initialize our Web3 Auth object. To do that, simply do await Web3 Auth and pass to it Web3 init params, and that is going to ask for a client ID and a network. So in the network, we're going to pass cyan, and the client ID we're going to get from a dashboard. Once we have that, we can move on and understand why the Web3 Auth object was initially optional. It's actually getting initiated inside a task on Appear, which is why in the beginning it's not initialized. Next up, we are going to define a VStack, which is basically just a simple UI to ensure that our login works. So if the user is logged in, I want to say that the user is logged in inside a text component. So if I toggle the logged in boolean to true, you'll see that it shows up. I'm gonna revert it to false and move on. Now I'm going to declare a function to log the user in. So I'm going to call it login. It's going to take a provider. The provider's value, we'll come back to that in a second. And it's again going to have a task do block where we'll say initialized web3auth is equal to self.web3auth. And inside the if block, we'll say that the result is equal to initialized web3auth.login. This is going to take a login params and we're just going to pass in the web3 init login params. And for the login provider, we'll pass in the provider, which was passed to the login function. Inside the main actor.run, we'll set the user to the result of the login call and set login equal to false. Now, inside the buttons action, I'm going to call the login function and send the provider as Google. There's a bunch of providers that Web3Auth provides, so you can select anyone that you like. Let's see what happens when we run it. In the emulator, I'll click on login to Web3 and inside a browser window, you'll see an error. And the reason is that we missed a step. So let's copy this URL and go back to our Web3 dashboard and add it to the whitelist. Now when we try to run our app again and click on login to Web3, you'll see a very familiar sign in with Google Form show up. And this is the power of our Web3 Auth. So just follow the standard login process, and after that, you should be redirected to the app. But we're not seeing a message. And the reason is that after the user logged in, we still set the logged in to false. So let's toggle it to true and also print out the result just to see what Web3 Auth is returning. Now when I run it and log in again, go through the entire process, I will see that the user is successfully logged in, and in my terminal, I also have all the details of the user printed. So you can see that I have their email, private key, and whatever I want to use in my app.